video was sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you need any Orzhov cards, or, well, any cards at all, you can find them at cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, I'm Nemesis, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This week I finally wrap up my series of videos looking at each of the guilds that are making an appearance in Ravnica Allegiance by looking at Orzhov. To be eligible for this list, a card had to be both black and white. There are over 150 cards that were eligible under that criterion, and in this video we will look at the 10 of those that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards on this list. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship top 8s, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are all worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. At number 10, we have the only card with hybrid black-white mana to make the list, and that's Stillmoon Cavalier. The Cavalier's protection and activated abilities make it a real pain to deal with. First Strike and Flying make it hard to block effectively, and if you have enough extra mana lying around, the Cavalier can even do more damage. In Block and Standard, the Cavalier was so good that tribal decks, like Fairies and Kithkins, ran him despite not sharing a creature type with the other creatures in those decks. In Standard, he also saw play in decks like Revelark and Red-White Vengeant. In Extended, it saw play in both Vengevine and Caw-Blade. While it has found success in multiple formats, it hasn't added to its score since 2011, and some new Orzhov cards printed in Ravnica Allegiance may have no problem pushing him off the list. At number 9, we have the first of 2 Planeswalkers to make the list. This one is Soren, Grim Nemesis. Soren comes with abilities that most really good Planeswalkers have a version of. He has a +1 that draws you cards, and it doesn't hurt that he can also damage your opponent while you draw extra cards. I guess it hurts your opponent, but it doesn't hurt you. His -X is a removal spell, and his -9 isn't easy to beat. Mostly, people just got him in play and drew a bunch of cards until the opponent played something they had to kill, and then they used the removal effect. He only saw play in Standard, primarily in control decks like Abzan, Orzhov, and Esper. He hasn't seen play since rotating, and it's hard to imagine him being good enough to find his way into non-rotating formats in the future. At number 8, we have the former leaders of the Orzhov Syndicate, and that's Obzedat, Ghost Council. A 5-mana 5/5 that also drains your opponent every turn for 2 is pretty nasty. Repeatable drain effects are particularly potent because they rapidly cause the gap between your life and your opponent's life to widen. It saw play primarily in control decks while it was in Standard, including, fittingly enough, Orzhov control, but also Esper and Junk control. The deck it probably was the most famous in is probably the Aristocrats deck, a deck that really liked draining the opponent's life. At number 7, we have the first of 3 incredibly powerful removal spells to make the list. Turns out black and white combined make some nice removal spells, and the card that is also the oldest on this MTG Top 10, and that's Vindicate. 3 mana to destroy any permanent is very powerful, and unlike effects like this we see today, this can actually hit lands too if that comes up. The flexibility and efficiency here made Vindicate one of the best removal spells in the extended format, where it was played in a wide variety of decks, including control, but also aggro decks like Zoo. It was powerful enough that it saw play in Legacy too at various points over the years. In the mid-2000s, this was primarily in Reanimator decks, but in the more recent past, it saw play in Stoneblade. It last had success in 2014, though. These days, there are just way cheaper removal spells available in Legacy. At number 6, we have another high-ranking individual from within the Orzhov Syndicate. This one is Blood Baron of Vizkopa. Having protection from 2 of the colors that frequently have great removal spells is awesome, and adding lifelink to that is great, especially because the Blood Baron really likes it when your life total gets high, and makes sure that if you ever do, your opponent isn't coming back from it, since he turns into a 10/10 with flying, and obviously still has lifelink. In Return to Ravnica block, it saw play as a win condition in Esper control decks. The deck it also saw play in Standard. In Standard, it also saw play, like several cards on this list, in an Orzhov control deck. At number 5, we have another black-white removal spell capable of destroying lots of different types of permanents, and that's Anguished Unmaking. In a lot of ways, it's a worse Vindicate because it makes you pay life and it can't destroy lands. However, it's not a perfect comparison because Anguished Unmaking is also an instant while Vindicate is a sorcery. Anytime an efficient spell is printed that can destroy most permanent types, it's going to see play in Constructed because this type of flexibility is rare. Anguished Unmaking saw play in a variety of control decks, including, once again, an Orzhov control deck, but also Esper and Mardu. However, because it's such a good removal spell, it wasn't the kind of removal spell that was restricted only to more controlling decks that want to run lots of removal. Aggro decks used it too, primarily a variety of Mardu decks like Mardu Vehicles, Mardu Aggro, and Mardu Ballista. At number 4, we have our third and final black-white removal spell that is capable of destroying a ton of different permanents. This one is Utter End. It costs more than either Anguished Unmaking or Vindicate, but Utter End doesn't make you pay life like Anguished Unmaking does, and it's instant speed. It saw a ton of play in Standard, with the most dominant home being the Abzan decks that were so good during the time. At number 3, we have the only card to make the list that has the Orzhov only Haunt mechanic, and that's Orzhov Pontiff. Creatures with Haunt have an enter the battlefield ability, and also after they haunt something, when the creature they're haunting dies, you get to do that ability all over again. His ability is a very good one. It pumps your whole team or weakens your opponent's whole team. In block, Sapperling tokens were everywhere, so playing the Pontiff was a pretty good idea if you could cast it, and 3 decks at the Block Constructed Pro Tour in 2006 ran the Pontiff in the top 8. Interestingly, Orzhov Pontiff didn't do a ton in Standard of his time, only picking up a single Pro Tour top 8. Extended is the other place where he saw a ton of success as a result of the metagame. Elf-based decks that ran Glimpse of Nature basically played their entire library in a single turn. The Pontiff could kill the majority of elves just by coming into play, and as a result, he was in a ton of sideboards in Extended up until Glimpse of Nature got banned. Even the elf decks themselves ran him, because he was such a good card in the mirror, and he could also pump your whole elf board and help you kill your opponent. Modern, though, is where the Pontiff has done the most. He was very good in birthing pod decks because of the utility he could have at any given point of the game. If you needed to pump your whole team for lethal, you could find the Orzhov Pontiff. If you needed to kill your opponent's small creatures, you needed to find the Orzhov Pontiff. After Birthing Pod got banned, the Pontiff has continued to see success in decks that have a similar game plan to Birthing Pod decks. These are toolbox decks like Court of Calling and Collected Company decks, where he's still seeing play today. At number 2, we have the second Soren to make the list. This one is Soren, Solemn Visitor. Soren has a -2 that creates a creature token that can help protect him, and a +1 that is especially potent if you have a bunch of creatures. His ultimate isn't the most incredible one, but that's okay, because Soren can win the game just with his +1, really. In Standard, he saw play along with Utter End and Abzan midrange and control, as well as in Orzhov tokens and Mardu control. He even managed a Pro Tour top 8 in Modern back in 2014 in the Modern version of Abzan. As you may have noticed, almost all the cards we've looked at so far today all had their successes in the past and aren't doing much these days, with the only exception being Orzhov Pontiff. Like the Orzhov Pontiff, our number 1 card is still seeing a ton of play, and it's Sin Collector, who had a pretty great 2018. The Collector has a powerful effect against control decks, not only getting rid of the best instant or sorcery in their hand, but also allowing you to get important information about that hand. Control decks themselves played it too, as it was a way to disrupt combo decks, and even taking removal away from more aggressive decks isn't a bad idea. At Pro Tour Dragon's Maze in 2013, a block Pro Tour, the Collector was powerful enough to pick up 4 top 8s. In Standard, it saw a solid amount of play in Aristocrats, Reanimator, Junk, Esper Control, as well as Orzhov Control. It also saw play in Modern, where it was a pretty good utility card for Birthing Pod decks. Just like Orzhov Pontiff, there were situations where tutoring it up was great. You could look at your opponent's hand, you got rid of an instant or sorcery. And like Orzhov Pontiff, it has since transitioned into toolbox decks that run Court of Calling and Collected Company ever since the banning of Birthing Pod. However, its most recent successes have come in tribal decks in Modern, where it sees play in the human deck. In 2018, Sin Collector added 14 points to its score exclusively in human aggro decks. It has a nice disruptive effect for those decks while also having the all-important human creature type. It's going to continue to add points to its score, as humans is still a relevant deck in Modern, so its hold on the number 1 spot on this list may be secure. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.